On August 12, 2023, 29-year-old Beth Chapman vanished without a trace on a hiking trail in Lamar Valley, Yellowstone National Park. A massive search operation involving helicopters and search and rescue dogs yielded no results. It seemed as though the young woman had simply vanished into the wilderness. She was officially declared dead. But exactly 8 months later, on April 12, 2024, in a remote section of the park, biologists made a chilling discovery. Inside a massive hollow in a dead cedar tree, they found a living creature. It was Beth. She had lost the ability to speak, and her emaciated body was tightly sewn into a thick black bear pelt, secured with steel buckles that prevented her from escaping. Who turned this young woman into a wild beast, and why, forcing her to endure the most terrifying months trapped inside? The morning of August 12, 2023, was surprisingly clear, but with that sharp, biting cold characteristic of the high mountains even in the height of summer. 29-year-old Beth Chapman, an experienced botanist and passionate wildlife photographer, parked her dark green Toyota SUV in an empty gravel lot. This spot was located near the start of a hiking trail in the Lamar Valley. The area is often called the American Serengeti because of its abundance of wildlife, endless expanses, and dense pockets of coniferous forest. Beth was planning a solo 3-day hike. Her main scientific goal was to collect samples of rare alpine lichens growing on steep slopes at an elevation of over 8,000 feet above sea level. The young woman was impeccably prepared for the trip, as befits a professional. She was wearing specialized hiking gear designed for extreme temperature fluctuations and sturdy hiking boots. And her massive backpack, weighing nearly 40 pounds, contained a reliable tent, a supply of provisions, a portable water filter, a first aid kit, and a satellite communicator. At 9:15 a.m., she sent her mother a final short message.
According to printouts from telecommunications companies and reconstructed data, the text read as follows.
Signal is fading, heading into Pelican Valley. It's incredibly quiet here. I'll write when I get back. After that, her device was never registered on any network again. The only witness who saw her that morning was a tourist from Idaho. According to his statement in the police report, he drove past the parking lot around 9 a.m. I saw her dark green car. The girl was standing by the open trunk, carefully checking the laces on her boots. She looked completely calm, the case file stated. According to the itinerary Beth left on her car's windshield, she was supposed to return by 5 p.m. on August 15th. When, at 7 p.m., her SUV was still sitting alone in the gravel parking lot, and her phone remained out of range, the girl's mother called the park's emergency services. Yellowstone Park Administration responded immediately. At 7:45 p.m., on-duty ranger Michael Davis arrived at the parking lot and confirmed the worst fears. The car was locked. Personal belongings such as a change of clothes lay untouched on the back seat, and the owner herself was nowhere to be found. On the morning of August 16th, one of the largest search and rescue operations in the park's history was launched. More than 80 experienced rangers, about 50 volunteers, and 5 specialized canine teams were immediately deployed. They combed through the rugged terrain, covering mile after mile around Lamar Valley and Slaw Creek. 2 helicopters, equipped with highly sensitive thermal imaging cameras, circled the dense coniferous forest around the clock, scanning every foot of ground. Search conditions were complicated by the fact that at night, the temperature in the mountains dropped sharply to 35 degrees Fahrenheit. This left critically few chances of survival in the event of a serious injury or hypothermia. Search teams divided the area, spanning more than 40 square miles, into sectors, methodically combing every ravine, every gorge, and the banks of fast-flowing mountain streams. A team of divers even surveyed several deep pools of the Lamar River, but the results remained negative. What puzzled even the most experienced rescuers was the behavior of the search dogs. According to senior dog handler Thomas Harris, 2 service German shepherds picked up the scent from the car with great confidence and led the rescuers about 3 miles deep into the forest along the river's course. But near a high rocky ledge next to the raging river, the trail abruptly ended. It looked as if the girl had simply vanished into thin air. The dogs circled around in confusion, unable to pick up any scent that would lead them further. The only tangible clue found during the entire extensive search was a small fragment of a leather strap from her professional camera. It was found on the 6th day of the operation, August 18th, in dense fern thickets half a mile from the spot where the dogs had finally lost the trail. An examination confirmed that the sturdy strap had been torn by considerable physical force, but no other traces were found around it. There was not a drop of blood, no signs of a struggle, no broken branches, nor the slightest hint of the presence of large predators, such as a black bear or a puma. A heavy backpack, an expensive camera, and Beth herself vanished without a trace into the deafening silence of the trees. Weeks passed, and the hope of finding the 29-year-old woman alive faded with every sunset. On September 12, 2023, the park administration made a difficult decision. The active phase of the search operation was officially called off. Thick folders of reports were filed away with a terse statement. Beth Chapman's disappearance was deemed a tragic accident in the wilderness. Investigators cited an accidental fall into a raging river, followed by the body's disappearance into a system of underwater caves, as the probable cause. All that was left for her family was to come to terms with their terrible loss. Beth never strayed from the marked trail. She was far too cautious and experienced to simply slip and fall off a cliff, her mother said in a heart-wrenching official statement to the local press. But the mountains remained deaf to human grief. The girl's photograph on the information board began to slowly fade under the merciless mountain sun. The police and rescue workers were absolutely certain that the wilderness had simply claimed yet another life, as often happens in these harsh lands. None of them even suspected that nature actually had nothing to do with it. From the thick shade of the ancient trees, someone's cold, calculating human eyes were watching the girl's every step, and her worst nightmare was only just beginning. Exactly 8 months had passed. Winter had receded, but its cold breath still lingered in the shadows of the deep gorges. On April 12, 2024, a group of biologists studying the migration of wolf packs ventured deep into a section of the park near Mount Washburn that was closed to tourists. This area was located at an elevation of over 8,000 feet and was known for its rugged terrain, impenetrable thickets, and sheer cliffs. No one had set foot here in years. Around noon, senior biologist David Brooks veered off the group's main route by a few hundred yards, tracking fresh predator tracks. As he pushed through the thick undergrowth, he stopped. The eerie silence of the forest seemed almost physically palpable. A giant dead cedar towered before him. The tree's trunk was at least 10 feet wide, and its dry branches resembled the skeleton of a colossal animal. According to the official report that Brooks would later submit to the police, the site looked like a carefully prepared hideout. The ground around the cedar's massive roots had been methodically trampled within a radius of about 20 feet. It did not look like a typical animal lair. The lower branches of the tree had been neatly cut off with a saw to clear access to the base of the trunk. A heavy odor hung in the air, a mixture of unwashed fur, old blood, and something elusively human. Brooks turned on his radio, but the signal was muffled by the thick rock. Right at ground level, among the gnarled roots, A deep black hole gaped, a massive hollow in the heart of the cedar. The biologist took out his flashlight and carefully directed the beam into the impenetrable darkness. What he saw made him recoil. The official report records his words as follows. I shone the light inside and saw a large black mass covered in thick fur. I was certain it was a dead black bear that hadn't woken from hibernation. But then the mass stirred in the light. The creature shuddered convulsively, trying to hide from the beam, and suddenly let out a sound. It wasn't a roar. It was a muffled, hoarse, guttural groan that conveyed pure animal terror. Brooks began screaming, calling for the rest of the team. When 3 more researchers rushed over, they joined forces to clear the passage and pull the unknown creature out. What appeared before their eyes blurred the line between reality and a nighttime delusion. It wasn't a bear. It was a human. It was Beth Chapman, the 29-year-old woman who had been officially declared dead 8 months earlier, was breathing. She was alive, yet her emaciated body was literally sewn into the thick, professionally tanned hide of a large black bear. The construction of this horrific shell was striking in its eerie ingenuity. According to the rescuers, the hide wasn't simply thrown over her. It was an airtight cocoon. The edges of the thick hide were tightly laced with synthetic thread and secured by a system of hidden leather straps 3 inches wide. Massive steel buckles were positioned at the chest and ankles. They were fastened in such a way that it was physically impossible to remove the structure from the inside. The girl's arms were tightly pressed against her torso, leaving only her hands free, which protruded through roughly cut openings. Her fingernails had turned into broken black claws. Beth's face was visible through the gaping maw of the bear's head, which had been sewn on like a hood. Her skin was gray, covered in dirt and scrapes, and her hair had matted into a single tangled mass. Her body shook with a constant tremor. When the biologists tried to speak to her, Beth did not respond. After 8 months of isolation, she had completely lost the ability to speak coherently. Instead of words, the girl bared her teeth and emitted short, guttural sounds, desperately trying to crawl back into the safety of the hollow's darkness. It was the haunted gaze of a trapped animal. There was no cell service, so the 2 researchers had to run 2 miles back to call a helicopter. Brooks stayed by the hollow. He stood frozen, watching as Beth frantically scratched at the ground with her blackened fingers. In that moment of oppressive silence, the biologist looked up and noticed a detail that made his blood run cold. There was a fresh cut in the pine trunk, with a piece of raw meat lying inside it. Someone had been coming here regularly all winter, wading through the snowdrifts to keep their experiment alive. And judging by the fresh boot prints on the wet ground, this unknown observer had been standing here no more than an hour ago, silently watching them from the dark thicket. Friends, before we move on to revealing the darkest details of this case, I ask you to do one important thing. Please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and leave any comment below. It's your actions like these that send a powerful signal to YouTube's algorithms, helping to promote the video. Thanks to your engagement, many more people will be able to see this story, which allows me to create new investigations for you. Thank you for your support. Now, let's return to what happened after the chilling discovery. That same day, April 12, 2024, a rescue helicopter urgently transported the woman to a secure psychiatric ward at a hospital in Bozeman. The flight lasted just over 40 minutes, but for the accompanying paramedics, that time felt like an eternity. According to their official reports, the patient kept making muffled, animal-like sounds, constantly trying to crawl into the darkest corner of the cabin, as far away from people as possible. An initial medical examination at the clinic revealed shocking details that would have made even the most seasoned detectives shudder. The process of freeing Beth Chapman from her fur prison took over 2 hours. The bearskin turned out to be not just a rough sack, but an extremely complex engineering structure. Something between a professional taxidermy suit and a medieval straitjacket. The thickness of the tanned hide exceeded half an inch in some places. On the inside, this eerie contraption was meticulously lined with a special high-tech thermal fabric typically used in gear for mountain or polar expeditions. This indicated one thing. The kidnapper had deliberately and meticulously planned to keep her alive during the harsh winter months. He knew full well that temperatures in Yellowstone drop well below 0 on the Fahrenheit scale, and without such artificial insulation, the girl would simply have frozen to death. The entire structure was securely held in place by thick leather straps hidden beneath black fur. When the doctors finally managed to cut through the tough hide with special surgical scissors, a horrific scene of utter physical exhaustion unfolded before them. 29-year-old Beth's weight had dropped to a critical level. She weighed less than 80 pounds. Her emaciated body was covered in a layer of dirt and deep abrasions. Deep, old scars remained on the girl's wrists and ankles. The nature of the tissue damage unequivocally indicated that she had been forced to wear heavy metal shackles continuously for many long months. However, the greatest, nearly irreversible damage was inflicted on her psyche. The department's chief psychiatrist documented in her medical chart a severe form of dissociative amnesia, complicated by a pronounced feral syndrome. Over 8 months of absolute isolation, an unknown tormentor methodically and cruelly forced the girl to forget her own human nature. According to the medical staff, Beth showed absolutely no reaction to her own name. She was terrified of the artificial light from the fluorescent lamps in the hospital ward, constantly hiding her face in her hands. She categorically refused to eat from porcelain plates, violently flipping them onto the sterile floor, and tried to swallow food without using her hands. She did not understand spoken language and communicated exclusively through guttural, intermittent, animal-like sounds. Her every movement was dictated by the basic instincts of a wild beast, constantly on the verge of attacking. Detectives quickly realized the full scale of the tragedy. It wasn't just an ordinary kidnapper on the loose in the remote forests of Yellowstone. They were dealing with a calculating sadist who possessed a sick, perverted understanding of the wild and was conducting a horrific psychological experiment on a living person, stripping away everything human from her. While doctors fought around the clock to keep Beth alive in the intensive care unit, forensic experts from the Federal Bureau of Investigation took the cut-open bear hide to a mobile lab. Carefully examining the stiff stitches under a powerful microscope, the senior forensic expert noticed something extremely anomalous. A tiny, barely visible symbol was engraved on the inner side of the metal buckle, and the fur itself gave off a distinct chemical odor that had absolutely nothing to do with the wild. This detail, seemingly insignificant at first glance, became the one key that was about to open the door to the monster's true lair. Since the 29-year-old victim was in a state of deep catatonic stupor and unable to provide any testimony, special agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation found themselves at a dead end. The only silent witness to the horrific crime was a piece of substantial physical evidence, the bear pelt itself. It was delivered to the regional forensic laboratory in an airtight plastic container. In a room with powerful ventilation, experts methodically examined the black fur and coarse internal seams, inch by inch. A senior chemical analyst noticed a distinct, pungent odor emanating from the tanned hide. According to the laboratory test report, gas chromatography revealed an extremely rare mixture of toxic tanning agents in the fiber samples. It was an outdated chemical cocktail based on heavy metals and specific acids. The case files indicate that such an aggressive tanning method was strictly prohibited and completely phased out of commercial taxidermy over 20 years ago due to its high toxicity. Whoever processed this hide either learned the craft several decades ago or deliberately used archaic artisanal techniques while working in complete isolation from modern standards. In parallel with the painstaking work of the chemists, the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Cyber Division focused its efforts on another source of information. Agents thoroughly analyzed the onboard computer and navigation system of Beth Chapman's dark green SUV, which had been sitting in a police impound lot for 8 months. Although there were no obvious signs of physical tampering, computer forensic experts managed to recover deleted data sets and uncover hidden connection logs. The results of the digital forensic analysis shocked even experienced investigators. The analysis revealed that several weeks before her disappearance in August 2023, an unknown device had been systematically intercepting the signal from her navigation system. An unknown stalker had been methodically and cold-bloodedly following her every move. Reports from the Cyber Division documented the stalker's every move. He followed her from her home in Bozeman all the way to a gravel parking lot near the national park's border, traversing dozens of miles of dangerous mountain switchbacks. He knew her schedule precisely, the duration of her stops at gas stations, and her favorite routes. This invisible tailing continued uninterrupted, turning the life of the unsuspecting botanist into a perfectly orchestrated hunt. By combining 2 lines of investigation, the geographical radius of the unknown stalker's movements, and a specific chemical marker of aged tanning, an analytical computer program produced a single exact match. The investigation led to a private leather tanning workshop, located in a remote outskirt of the town of Gardner, Montana. This gloomy building was situated just a few miles from the northern entrance to Yellowstone National Park. According to tax records, the owner of this wooded plot and the dilapidated workshop turned out to be Arthur Wayne, a 45-year-old local resident. Wayne's file, urgently retrieved from the National Park Service's personnel archives, revealed a dark history and provided investigators with a clear psychological profile of the suspect. The 45-year-old man was a former senior ranger and an experienced professional hunter who knew every inch of the park better than anyone else. According to his performance evaluations, he had been dismissed from the service in a scandal exactly 5 years ago. His voluminous personnel file contained numerous documented complaints from park visitors regarding the ranger's inappropriate and extremely aggressive behavior. During official interviews, Wayne's former colleagues testified that he openly promoted radical, misanthropic ideas that frightened even seasoned forest rangers. The minutes of his disciplinary hearings clearly document his fanatical statements that modern society is an incurable disease, and that carefree tourists are nothing more than meat. What troubled the investigators most was his obsessive belief in the need to forcibly return humans to the natural food chain. After his release, he became a complete recluse, severed all social ties, and shut himself away in his private workshop. It was there, as federal agents now understood perfectly well, that the former ranger began to turn his twisted philosophy into reality, becoming the architect of the most horrific experiment ever conducted on a living human being. Having obtained an emergency search warrant, an armed task force from the Federal Bureau of Investigation set out for the town of Gardner. Thick darkness was slowly descending on the mountain slopes as a convoy of black armored vans, with their headlights and sirens off, approached the grounds of Arthur Wayne's private workshop. The main building looked completely abandoned. The old windows were tightly boarded up with thick planks, and no smoke was rising from the tall brick chimney. The SWAT team silently took up tactical positions around the entire perimeter, preparing for a hard-hitting assault. The assault team commander had already raised his hand to give the order to break down the door, when suddenly, through the operatives' headsets, they heard the alarmed voice of a sniper who was monitoring the area through a powerful thermal imager. What he saw deep underground, right beneath the Special Forces' feet, caused the experienced agents to freeze in place in eerie anticipation. At 5:30 a.m., a tactical team from the Federal Bureau of Investigation began storming a private workshop in the town of Gardner. The air temperature was barely 40 degrees Fahrenheit when the heavy armored doors of the main building were blown to smithereens by a targeted explosion. The Special Forces instantly flooded the premises, searching every room with their weapons at the ready. However, 45-year-old Arthur Wayne was nowhere to be found inside. The house stood empty, engulfed in an eerie silence. The suspect had vanished without a trace, but what forensic investigators soon discovered on his property provided irrefutable grounds for an indictment. The investigators' attention was drawn to an old wooden shed for drying hides, located 50 yards from the house. After moving aside the massive shelves, covered with a thick layer of dust and dried-up chemicals, the agents discovered a heavy steel hatch built directly into the dirty floor. Descending a narrow metal ladder 15 feet below ground, the investigative team found themselves in a spacious, camouflaged concrete basement. Wayne had converted this bunker into a sort of deep, man-made cave. The walls had been deliberately left rough and uneven, with cold water constantly trickling down them. The air here was extremely heavy, saturated with a lingering smell of dampness and animal fear. Massive iron cages, welded from thick, rusty rebar, stood along the damp concrete walls. Each one was no larger than 16 square feet. Inside these cells, there were neither beds nor blankets, only bare, icy concrete. Coarse leather collars and thick metal chains lay scattered on the floor. In the corner of each cage stood ordinary metal dog bowls, intended for water and food. Forensic experts immediately collected biological samples. A comprehensive DNA analysis will yield a definitive result. It was from these very dog bowls that 29-year-old Beth Chapman ate during the first months of her horrific captivity. The true extent of Arthur Wayne's obsession became clear when technicians illuminated the opposite wall of the basement with powerful spotlights. The entire concrete space, from floor to ceiling, was densely covered with hundreds of photographs. They were unsuspecting tourists, captured through a high-powered zoom lens. Beneath each photograph hung a neat white tag with the date, time, and exact geographic coordinates. For years, Wayne had been watching park visitors, selecting potential victims like a predator lying in wait. However, one distinct, massive corkboard in the center of the room was dedicated exclusively to Beth Chapman. It was a detailed, chilling chronology of her life. Wayne had been tracking her for many months in a row. The display featured photographs of her home in Bozeman, pictures of her car, shots from stores, and dozens of photos from her previous hikes. Her every move, every habit, and favorite routes were meticulously documented with a red marker. Wayne knew absolutely everything about her and had precisely calculated the ideal moment for his attack. In the very center of this makeshift lair stood a heavy oak table. On it, investigators found stacks of filled-out notebooks with dark covers. These were Arthur Wayne's diaries, which read more like the deranged manifesto of a fanatic. Page after page, the forensic experts read the sadist's even, neat handwriting. Wayne wrote that he considered all of modern society to be an incurable disease. He sincerely believed that only by completely breaking the human psyche and forcing the victim to literally live in the body of a wild beast could he heal her soul forever. According to the diary entries, Beth's brutal confinement in an iron cage and being fed from a dog bowl was only the first stage of her horrific transformation. And those endless months that the woman spent wrapped in a bearskin in the hollow of a dead cedar tree at temperatures well below zero on the Fahrenheit scale turned out not to be the end. Wayne dryly referred to this as his winter survival experiment. He was testing whether basic animal instincts could erase her human self. Agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation silently flipped through the pages of the manifesto, realizing the sheer evil they were facing. The silence was broken only by the sound of dripping water. Suddenly, the senior detective paused at the last entry in the diary. The ink on that page hadn't quite dried yet. The entry had been made at exactly 4:15 a.m., a little over an hour before the assault began. There was only one short line, which made the operatives grip their weapons more tightly. Wayne had left them a message that made it clear. The hunter had already begun a new hunt. It took more than a month and a half of intensive, extremely grueling therapy in the closed psychiatric intensive care unit at the Bozeman Clinic before 29-year-old Beth Chapman began to utter her first conscious words. The process of her return to her former self was extremely complex, lengthy, and meticulously recorded on magnetic audio tape by court-appointed psychiatrists. Each session, lasting many hours, reminded the doctors of the careful, painful process of piecing together a mirror shattered into thousands of tiny shards. It was not until the end of May 2024 that the department's chief physician allowed 2 special agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation to be present during the recording of her official testimony. The young woman's voice was quiet, hoarse, and kept breaking after 8 long months of using only guttural, animal-like sounds. Slowly, detail by detail, overcoming bouts of panic, she recalled that fateful August morning of 2023. According to the transcript of the official interrogation, Beth recounted that around 10 o'clock in the morning, she had strayed a few hundred feet off the main Lamar Trail into the depths of the forest. She wanted to photograph a rare species of lichen growing on a high cliff. Suddenly, she heard a faint rustling of branches and immediately felt a sharp, burning sting in her neck. Arthur Wayne had shot her with an air rifle, firing a dart laced with an extremely potent veterinary tranquilizer. Rangers typically use such specialized drugs to quickly sedate adult black bears. The woman didn't even have time to take a breath to call for help before her body was instantly paralyzed and her consciousness plunged into deep, impenetrable darkness. When Beth came to, she was surrounded by the utter darkness of a concrete basement, and her body was weighed down by an incredible, suffocating heaviness. Gradually, she realized that a heavy bear pelt, reeking of chemicals and raw meat, had already been tightly fastened onto her. Wayne wasn't just holding her in brutal captivity. He had begun a ruthless, systematic training regimen, which he had described in such detail and with such maniacal precision in his diaries that were later found. In her horrifying testimony, the victim described a routine that lasted for endless weeks in an underground bunker. Any slight display of humanity was met with immediate and brutal punishment. If she began to cry, tried to speak in a pleading tone to her tormentor, or attempted to stand up from her knees, the man would, without a word, shut the iron door, depriving her of water and any source of light for several days in a row. Later, the former National Park employee began using a metal hunting whistle to condition her reflexes. One long, piercing blast signaled permission to eat. 2 short blasts were an unquestionable order to immediately return to the far corner of the iron cage. Day after day, the woman was methodically trained to move exclusively on all 4s. According to leading forensic experts, her knees and palms were worn down to deep, jagged scars due to constant, months-long contact with the rough concrete floor. She learned to be inconspicuous and silent, like a true wild predator. With the onset of winter, when the temperature in the park's mountainous regions plummeted to a dangerous 20 degrees below zero on the Fahrenheit scale, the maniac's experiment entered its most terrifying, final stage. Beth recalled how he had suddenly given her another injection of a sedative. She came to inside an extremely narrow, icy space. It was that same pre-prepared, enormous hollow in a dead cedar tree deep in the wilderness, many miles from any tourist trails. Now the thick hide was sewn shut tightly with strong steel threads, turning a living person into a helpless prisoner of her own warm cocoon. Wayne came only once every few days, covering miles of snow-covered terrain on snowshoes. He never spoke to her, preserving the absolute silence of the wilderness. The hunter silently tossed pieces of fresh, raw meat to her through a narrow opening in the trunk. He forced the girl to tear them apart with her teeth, since her own hands were tightly bound with straps beneath the thick fur. According to the official findings of a commission of psychiatrists, it was during this critical period of February's bitter cold, constant hunger, and absolute, all-consuming isolation that the girl's psyche finally began to break down. The basic instinct for survival took unquestionable precedence over the mind of the 29-year-old woman. To keep from going mad from the unbearable physical pain and primal fear, Beth Chapman's brain created a powerful protective barrier. She truly began to perceive herself as a wild beast, gradually transforming into a docile, perfect pet of her deranged creator. Toward the very end of the 2-hour interrogation, when the federal agents had already drawn up their reports and were about to turn off the recording device, believing the overall picture of the crime to be completely clear, Beth suddenly froze. Her gaze, which until then had been distantly fixed on the white hospital ceiling, sharply focused on the detectives' faces. The woman's body tensed like a taut string. She recalled her last, most terrifying encounter with her abductor before she was accidentally found by the biologists. According to her, on that April morning, he hadn't brought her usual portion of meat. Instead, he leaned right up to the very opening of the tree hollow, removed his mask of silence, and for the first time in 8 long months, spoke to her in a real human voice. He whispered one short but clear phrase to her very quietly. When Beth repeated those words verbatim, without a trace of emotion, in the silence of the hospital room, experienced investigators felt an icy chill run down their spines. What she had said meant that all the armed special forces units in the mountains were, at that very moment, blindly heading into a premeditated, deadly trap. The phrase that Beth Chapman quietly whispered in a closed ward at the Bozeman Hospital forced the detectives to instantly change the entire tactics of the operation. According to declassified audio recordings of the interrogations, the young woman relayed Arthur Wayne's last words. "I left them a forest full of iron." That short sentence explained absolutely everything. Realizing that the net of the investigation was inevitably tightening following the chilling discovery in the hollow of a dead cedar tree, the former ranger hadn't simply vanished. He had deliberately retreated into the extremely inaccessible Absaroka mountain range, stretching east of Yellowstone, turning it into a veritable death zone. On May 28, 2024, at 6 a.m., the most difficult and dangerous apprehension operation in the history of Wyoming law enforcement began. The Absaroka Range is a wild, untamed territory where the sharp peaks rise well over 10,000 feet above sea level, and dense coniferous forests alternate with deep, rocky gorges. Wayne knew these mountains inside and out, better than any topographic map. He moved exclusively late at night, when the temperature plummeted below 30 degrees Fahrenheit, deliberately avoiding thermal imaging cameras and police drones. During the day, he became completely invisible, blending seamlessly into the rugged landscape. A hunter who had spent his entire adult life tracking game had now become the target himself. But he categorically refused to give up. On the contrary, he played out his final game with cold-blooded calculation. Beth Chapman's words about a forest full of iron proved to be a terrifying, bitter truth as early as the second day of the intense manhunt. On May 29th at 11 a.m., a tactical team making its way through dense underbrush encountered its first obstacle. Official reports from the Federal Bureau of Investigation state that a lead operative nearly lost his leg when a massive, rusty bear trap, skillfully camouflaged under a layer of dry pine needles and mountain moss, snapped shut with a terrifying clang right next to him. Wayne methodically placed these deadly traps along narrow animal trails, forcing the armed special forces to slow their advance to a critical minimum. The official criminal case files contain over 40 pages of reports on the neutralization of such traps. The investigators understood clearly. The fugitive wasn't just saving his own life. He genuinely wanted to take as many of his pursuers with him as possible. The tension reached its absolute peak on the fourth day of a continuous, extremely grueling pursuit. On May 31st, 2024, at 2:45 a.m., the situation changed dramatically. The crew of a police helicopter, equipped with a powerful military thermal imager, was once again scanning the northern slope of the mountain range. Suddenly, a bright white spot flashed on the monochrome monitor screen. The thermal imager detected a single, stable heat source. It was located at the very bottom of an extremely narrow, rocky gorge, from which there was no inconspicuous exit. After receiving the exact coordinates, 3 mobile assault teams began a silent, coordinated approach to the target, using night vision goggles and moving in complete darkness. At 5:15 a.m., when the first rays of the cold sun barely touched the mountain peaks, the armed special forces had completely blocked all exits from the gorge. Arthur Wayne found himself in a perfect trap at the edge of a steep precipice over 200 feet deep. He had no chance of escape, not even a theoretical one. Through a powerful loudspeaker, the tactical team commander ordered him to drop his weapon immediately and lie face down on the ground. For several long, unbearably tense minutes, the mountain gorge was filled only with the eerie howling of the wind. It seemed as though the former National Park employee had finally come to terms with his complete defeat and was preparing to surrender to justice. Suddenly, however, a wild, inhuman scream rang out from behind a massive gray boulder, a sound more like the roar of a wounded beast than the voice of a grown man. Instead of obediently raising his hands, Wayne burst out of cover. In his right hand, the long blade of a massive hunting knife glinted dimly. He charged straight into the line of fire of the frontline agents, covering the last 20 yards with astonishing, fanatical speed. Snipers, who had been firmly holding him in their sights from elevated positions, instantly opened fire to kill. Several precise shots abruptly halted his advance. Wayne fell from his momentum onto sharp rocks, bleeding profusely from severe, multiple gunshot wounds to his chest and right shoulder. The operatives approached the body with extreme caution, keeping their weapons at the ready. The man was unconscious, but his heart was still beating faintly. Military paramedics immediately began emergency resuscitation efforts, desperately trying to save his life for the upcoming court-martial. When the senior officer began conducting a standard search of the suspect's clothing for concealed weapons or explosives, he pulled a small, tightly folded sheet of thick paper from the inner pocket of his blood-stained jacket. It was a detailed, hand-drawn topographic map of the park. On it, a thick red marker had circled not only the secluded area where Beth Chapman had been found alive. 3 other distinct locations were clearly visible on the map, each marked with a fresh cross and a specific date from the previous year. The officer turned pale and with a trembling hand pressed the button on his radio, realizing with horror that the real nightmare in these mountains might not be over at all. The trial of Arthur Wayne, which began on November 18, 2024, instantly became a national sensation. But before the case reached the federal courtroom, investigators had to unravel the chilling mystery of that very map, seized from the pocket of the hunter's blood-stained jacket. The 3 red crosses, neatly marked on the topographic grid of Yellowstone National Park, turned out to be anything but random marks. Official forensic reports documented the horrific findings. At each of these crosses, located more than 20 miles apart in deep, rocky canyons, rescue teams found human remains. They were 3 young hikers who had been officially listed as missing for the past 2 years. Forensic examinations unequivocally established that all of them had died from extreme exhaustion, dehydration, and severe hypothermia, having become preliminary, failed experiments in Wayne's morbid quest to subjugate human will to savage animal instincts. These horrific physical discoveries transformed the case of Beth Chapman's abduction into a full-scale investigation into a series of first-degree murders. A tense, almost sterile silence reigned in the Wyoming federal courtroom. The defense team built its main argument around desperate attempts to prove the complete insanity of the 45-year-old defendant. For hours, they monotonously quoted maniacal entries from the diaries found in the underground bunker, trying to convince the jury that the former senior ranger suffers from a severe form of schizophrenia and sincerely believes in his mission to forcibly return people to the basic food chain. However, an experienced team of prosecutors completely dismantled this theory. Using financial records detailing the purchase of toxic chemicals for artisanal tanning, recovered digital files from the victim's SUV's navigation system, and expert testimony regarding the perfectly planned covert pursuit routes, the prosecution proved its case beyond a reasonable doubt. Arthur Wayne planned every move with utterly cold, ruthless calculation and mathematical precision. He was fully aware of the criminal nature of his actions and deliberately avoided surveillance cameras on mountain roads. Despite catastrophic psychological trauma and long months of difficult, exhausting rehabilitation at a closed clinic, 29-year-old Beth Chapman found the strength to be present during the announcement of the final sentence. Her appearance in the courtroom on December 22, 2024, marked a turning point in the entire trial. According to the court transcripts, she sat perfectly upright, never once taking her eyes off the glass booth where the defendant sat, shackled with heavy metal handcuffs. She looked at her tormentor, not with the eyes of a cornered beast, which he had so desperately tried to turn her into, but with the steely gaze of a strong, unbreakable person. When the judge read the sentence, 3 consecutive life terms in a maximum security prison with no possibility of parole, not a single muscle on the young woman's face twitched. Later, Beth wrote a candid memoir about her harrowing struggle for survival in the utter darkness and cold of a dead cedar tree's hollow. She transferred every last cent of the proceeds from the book's sales, which totaled over $500,000, to the bank accounts of a special fund dedicated to the psychological rehabilitation of victims of prolonged kidnappings. Her story became the most striking proof that the human spirit cannot be broken, no matter how thick a shell they try to lock it in for months on end. In January 2025, Arthur Wayne was transferred to a maximum security prison high in the mountains of Colorado. He completely refused to communicate with staff or other inmates. For hours on end, he sat motionless on the cold concrete floor of his 64-square-foot solitary confinement cell, like a wild beast in an iron cage, without uttering a single sound. The court case seemed to be definitively closed. But exactly 2 months after the sentencing, on March 14th at 3 a.m., a security officer on duty noticed something extremely strange during a routine patrol of the block. Instead of sleeping on his cot, the convict was maniacally scratching precise topographic coordinates into the hard gray concrete with a sharp fragment of his own fingernail. These were definitely not the coordinates of any of the 3 victims already found. Next to a long row of blood-stained numbers, he had very carefully written the date, which was still 4 days away, and one short word that forced prison authorities to immediately alert agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, leaving absolutely everyone facing the terrifying question of what exactly was patiently awaiting them beyond this new, unknown marker on the endless map of the wild national.